Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine for a moment one person's observations, not just, a few casual notes, but meticulous data gathered over years across
Uh-huh.
continents and then synthesized really painstakingly over decades.
Uh-huh.
Now, picture those insights completely reshaping not just our understanding of biology, but, profoundly influencing philosophy, sociology, anthropology,
Everything, really.
yeah, even fundamentally altering how we view our place in the whole universe. That's the staggering, almost unbelievable legacy of Charles Darwin. It's genuinely hard to overstate the seismic shift his ideas created, just fundamentally altering our understanding of life itself.
What's fascinating here is how deeply ingrained Darwin's ideas are now, right,
Hmm.
in modern science. Yet the journey to get there,
Yeah,
it was anything but straightforward.
no kidding.
It was a path riddled with personal struggles, intellectual detours, and just immense societal controversy when the ideas finally came out. So we're going to dive into the sources today, really uncover how his life, his remarkable voyage, and his rigorous thought process,
Hmm.
how it all culminated in this completely new paradigm for understanding the history of life on Earth. He wasn't just a scientist. He was, well, unequivocally a revolutionary. He fundamentally changed scientific thought forever.
Absolutely. And our mission today, for you listening, is to give you a shortcut, a way to get truly well-informed on one of science's most pivotal and, yeah, revolutionary figures.
Uh-huh.
We'll be extracting the most important nuggets of knowledge, the key insights from the material we've looked at, guiding you through the incredible story of Charles Darwin and his pioneering work on the theory of evolution.
Yeah, the whole journey.
Exactly. We'll delve into his formative years, that transformative HMS Beagle voyage, the meticulous and often solitary development of his theory of natural selection, and its enduring, truly monumental impact across so many disciplines.
It really touches everything.
It does. So you'll walk away with, hopefully, a clear understanding of Darwin's genius, the sheer audacity of his ideas back then, and precisely why his work continues to matter so profoundly in our modern world. So let's begin at the very beginning with the man himself, Charles Robert Darwin, born February 12, 1809, in Shrewsbury, England.
Right?
Now picture this. He wasn't born into just any family. The Darwins were well-respected, intellectually vibrant, deeply rooted in the Unitarian tradition, actually, which often encouraged rational thinking, inquiry.
That's an important context.
It is. His father, Robert Darwin, was a successful, very well-respected physician. And if you look at the family tree, it's kind of packed with scientists and progressive thinkers.
Yeah, his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin.
Exactly. Erasmus Darwin, he was a prominent physician himself, a natural philosopher, a poet even. And he had actually published his own evolutionary ideas. Sort of speculative, maybe, but decades before Charles.
So the seeds were there, in a way.
The intellectual environment was certainly there, yeah. But Charles himself, as a young boy, he seemed less inclined toward, formal academic stuff. He was much more drawn to the natural world around him. He showed this almost innate, profound curiosity for nature from a really young age.
Collecting things?
Loved collecting things, minerals, coins, especially beetles. He was just an avid amateur naturalist, spending hours observing birds, hunting, fishing, filling notebooks with observations.
Right.
But what's really remarkable, though, is how he wasn't immediately, destined for this scientific career he became famous for. It almost makes him seem like an accidental naturalist in the grand scheme. His early life was much more about just following his passions than, say, charting a clear professional course.
That's right. And his early educational journey, it was surprisingly, well, complicated,
Okay.
full of these detours, which actually looking back might have been absolutely crucial for the unique sort of multidisciplinary perspective he eventually developed. He initially went to Edinburgh University. He was only 16, studying medicine just like his father.
Right, following the family path.
Yeah, but he just couldn't stomach it. I mean, literally, the medical practices back then,
Yeah.
especially surgeries without anesthesia, he found them deeply disturbing.
Oh, I can imagine.
He wrote about finding the dissections and operations horrifying. He just couldn't continue. So it wasn't a success, in the traditional sense, but it definitely steered him away from a path that wasn't right for him. A pivotal moment of self-discovery, even if it was unpleasant.
So what then?
Well, after dropping medicine, his father, apparently quite exasperated, sent him to Cambridge University to study theology, believe it or not.
Theology, wow.
Yeah, the idea was he'd become a clergyman. which seems like an even stranger pivot for someone who become, a titan of science.
Didn't
But during his time there, his underlying interest in natural sciences just, it really blossomed. While he was officially on this path to the church, he was actively immersing himself in botany, geology, zoology, often kind of neglecting his theological studies for his real passions.
Okay. Finding his interests despite the official track.
Exactly. And he got deeply influenced by some key figures there. Professor John Stevens Henslow, a botanist, became a real mentor and friend. He encouraged Darwin's natural history interests, taught him meticulous observation skills,
Right.
and he also went on geological trips with Professor Adam Sedgwick, a prominent geologist. That exposed him to field work, to the emerging understanding of Earth's ancient history.
So geology and botany, even while studying theology.
Yeah. So what's fascinating here is how these apparent failures or shifts in direction, which might have looked like setbacks or just indecision back then, they actually let him explore all these diverse scientific fields.
Broadened his horizons.
Totally. It gave him this broad, multidisciplinary foundation, medicine, botany, geology, zoology, that frankly few others at the time had. It prepared him, probably unknowingly, for the huge task ahead.
And all those seemingly unconnected experiences, that varied intellectual diet, it all culminated in one truly pivotal moment.
Absolutely.
In 1831, he's still pretty young, just 22, he gets this invitation that would not only change his life forever, but, you could argue, the entire course of scientific understanding.
The Beagle.
The Beagle. He was invited, largely on Henslow's recommendation, wasn't he, to join HMS Beagle for a global expedition as the ship's naturalist.
Yeah, it was Henslow who put him forward.
And this wasn't just a trip, this was the foundational experience. The thing that truly launched his scientific career, gave him the raw material, the global perspective he desperately needed. Without that invitation, I mean, who knows what path his life or our understanding of evolution might have taken. So the HMS Beagle expedition, it lasted from late 1831 to late 1836. 5 years. It truly was an incredible, almost unbelievable opportunity for a young, curious naturalist like Darwin.
Absolutely life-changing.
Imagine setting off on a 5-year journey around the world on a British Royal Navy survey ship, often cramped, battling seasickness constantly.
He suffered terribly from seasickness.
Terribly. Yet surrounded by this world of discovery, it must have felt like the ultimate adventure, but mixed with some profound challenges too.
No doubt.
And Darwin's specific role on board as the ship's naturalist. He was tasked with collecting specimens, making observations, documenting the natural history of the lands they surveyed. This wasn't a small thing. It was a unique, unparalleled opportunity.
Yeah, a formal position, even if somewhat unpaid initially.
Right. It meant he had the freedom, the mandate, to meticulously examine different ecosystems, observe countless living species, study diverse geological structures all across the globe. He wasn't just a passenger. He was there to collect, dissect, record, interpret, often spending long stretches ashore exploring while the ship did its surveying work.
Which was key. That time on land was crucial.
Definitely. And the itinerary. I mean, it was vast, covered immense distances, an astonishing variety of environments. He sailed along the coasts of South America for several years.
Yeah, Brazil, Argentina, Chile.
Which itself offered this incredible array of biodiversity geological formations, from lush rainforests to the soaring Andes, the arid Patagonian plains. Then, crucially, there were the Galapagos Islands, which, as we'll get into, became the sort of crucible for his ideas.
The famous stop.
The famous stop. But the journey didn't end there. He also visited Australia, New Zealand, parts of Africa, smaller islands too. This comprehensive global exposure. Witnessing the sheer range of biological, geological diversity firsthand, it was absolutely critical. It didn't just fuel his thinking. It provided the empirical foundation for pretty much all his later theories.
Indeed.
Wow.
And the Galapagos Islands. They absolutely were a crucible for Darwin's evolutionary ideas. It was a truly critical stop because of their unique isolation and the way life had clearly diversified there.
So what specifically caught his eye?
What really stood out to him was observing various finch species, also mockingbirds, giant tortoises, that were remarkably similar in their general form, but showed these distinct features, these adaptations, tailored to their specific island environments.
Like the finch's beaks?
Exactly like the finch's beaks. He noted how finches on different islands had beaks of varying shapes and sizes, some thick and strong for cracking hard seeds, others slender for probing flowers or grabbing insects. Each beak seemed perfectly suited for the particular types of food found only on their island.
Wow.
And he saw similar patterns with the giant tortoises. On different islands, they had distinct shell shapes, again, seemingly adapted to their feeding habits, the vegetation available on their specific island.
So island-specific adaptations.
Precisely. And this wasn't just a curiosity. It became a profound aha moment for Darwin. Though it's important to say, it wasn't fully crystallized until years after the voyage back in England, when ornithologists helped him identify the finches properly.
Right, it took time to process.
It did. But he realized these variations weren't random. They suggested a process of, well, what he later called descent with modification. The idea that species aren't fixed, unchanging things, but rather that populations could gradually adapt, change over time in response to their environment. This started to suggest a process by which new species could actually arise from common ancestors, driven by environmental pressures and isolation.
Which was radical.
Totally radical.
Yeah.
A huge departure from the prevailing view that species were divinely created, immutable, each in its perfect original form. He started seeing how maybe a single ancestral species might have colonized the archipelago and then diversified into all these different forms, each specialized for its particular island niche.
That's a huge conceptual leap.
It is. And furthermore, throughout the entire voyage, Darwin wasn't just focused on living organisms. He meticulously collected fossil remains, geological samples. He became quite a good geologist himself, actually.
Right, reading Lyell.
Exactly. The fossil evidence, especially those extinct giant sloths and armadillos, things like the Glyptodon and Megatherium that he dug up in South America, they showed him that life forms had changed dramatically over immense geological time. These past species were clearly related to, but significantly different from, the ones living there now. This hinted at extinction, transformation,
Yeah.
and the geological samples reinforced this concept that was pretty radical at the time. Uniformitarianism, championed by Charles Lyell in his Principles of Geology, which Darwin read avidly on the Beagle.
What's uniformitarianism, briefly?
It's the idea that the Earth itself has an immensely ancient past, shaped by slow, continuous processes we still see today, erosion, volcanism, uplift, rather than sudden, huge catastrophes.
Got it. Slow, gradual change over vast time.
Precisely. And this concept of deep time, millions and millions of years, provided the necessary timescale for the slow, gradual evolutionary changes he was starting to hypothesize.
Ah, okay, it needed that vast time frame.
Exactly. So all these observations, from the subtle variations in finch beaks to the grand scale of geological change, the succession of fossil forms, they all started to spark the initial outlines of his groundbreaking theory. It was like a puzzle, and the pieces were slowly falling into place.
What's often misunderstood, I think, and really critical to appreciate, is that the theory of evolution wasn't some instant revelation for Darwin the moment he stepped off the Beagle.
No, absolutely not.
Far from it. That incredible 5-year journey was really just the beginning, right? It provided the raw material, the initial sparks of this revolutionary idea.
Yeah, the seeds.
But then he embarked on this long, incredibly meticulous, and often quite solitary process of intellectual digestion, rigorous investigation that lasted for decades.
Decades is right.
To give you a sense of the sheer dedication, the intellectual fortitude involved here, Darwin spent over 20 years after the Beagle voyage doing rigorous research, performing countless experiments in his garden, his greenhouse.
Downhouse became his laboratory.
Right. Dissecting specimens, painstakingly synthesizing all the collected data. He filled hundreds of notebooks, his famous transmutation notebooks, corresponded endlessly with naturalists, breeders.
Pigeon fanciers, barnacle experts.
Exactly. Delved deep into topics ranging from barnacles, which took him 8 years, to pigeon breeding. Altogether, every possible piece of evidence to support these revolutionary ideas. This wasn't a sudden flash of insight he just jotted down. This was a painstakingly built, meticulously supported argument refined over 2 whole decades, often with, profound personal anxieties about how his work would be received.
Definitely. He knew it was controversial.
He wanted to be absolutely sure, to anticipate every objection, gather an overwhelming body of evidence before he presented his ideas to the world. No rushing it.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really underscores the scientific rigor Darwin applied, which is why his theory was ultimately so robust. His core concept, the mechanism he proposed for how species change over time, was natural selection.
Natural selection, the key phrase.
The key phrase. And at its heart, it's based on a surprisingly simple, yet profoundly powerful idea. Variation exists within any species, right?
Right.
Individuals aren't identical. And these variations lead to different chances of survival and reproduction, depending on how well an individual's traits fit or adapt to its specific environment. It's quite an elegant concept, providing a natural, not supernatural, explanation for life's incredible diversity and adaptation.
So can you elaborate a bit more on the mechanism? How does natural selection actually work?
Yeah. So Darwin proposed that in nature, every species has the capacity to produce way more offspring than their environment can possibly support. Think of fish eggs or seeds from a tree,
Right, lots of potential offspring.
tons. But resources are limited. This inevitably leads to what he termed the struggle for existence, a constant competition for limited resources, food, water, mates, space, avoiding predators.
Okay, the struggle.
He actually drew inspiration here from Thomas Malthus's essay on population. Malthus highlighted how human populations tend to grow exponentially while resources grow, well, arithmetically, leading to inevitable struggle. Darwin saw that same principle playing out everywhere in the natural world.
I see the connection.
So, as a result of this inherent competition, individuals born with traits that happen to be better suited or most adapted to their particular environment, they're more likely to survive, more likely to escape predators, find food, find mates, and crucially reproduce.
Makes sense.
And critically, they're more likely to pass on those advantageous heritable traits to the next generations. Conversely, individuals with less favorable traits are less likely to survive and reproduce. Their traits become less common over time.
So the environment selects.
Exactly, over vast stretches of time, and that deep time is crucial. Again, this continuous process of selection, where the environment effectively selects for beneficial traits, leads to gradual, incremental evolutionary changes. These changes accumulate across generations, causing living things to transform and diversify. Eventually, this can lead to the emergence of entirely new species from common ancestors. So this mechanism, natural selection, it wasn't just a hypothesis, it was a scientifically articulated process that explained how such vast diversity could arise from common ancestors without needing to invoke any supernatural intervention. It was tangible, observable, even if its full implications took decades, even centuries, to fully grasp.
In all this painstaking work, all these observations, syntheses, this intellectual struggle and refinement, it all culminated in one of the most significant publications in human history. On the origin of species by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life.
Quite a title.
Quite a title, which he finally published in 1859. And this wasn't just a book. It was the culmination of his life's work up to that point, his magnum opus. And when it was released, it sent unprecedented shockwaves through science, society, everywhere.
And spurred into publication, as you hinted, by that letter from Alfred Russel Wallace.
Right. Wallace had independently come up with a very similar idea, which must have been quite a shock for Darwin.
A huge shock. But it pushed him to finally get his meticulously documented theory out there to the world.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. On the origin of species, it wasn't just, another scientific paper filed away somewhere. It was a bombshell.
Yeah.
It just exploded long-held beliefs.
Absolutely detonated them.
And it's rightly considered one of the most influential works in the entire history of biology and arguably all of Western thought. Its impact was immediate, profound. It triggered a revolution that went way beyond just natural history.
Yeah, the book comprehensively defended several really radical views, ideas that directly challenged the prevailing scientific and societal consensus of the time.
Like what were the big ones?
Okay, first and foremost, and maybe the most controversial, Darwin argued species are not fixed. They aren't static, unchanging things that have existed in their current form since creation.
Right. Challenging that biblical literal interpretation.
And the dominant Linnaean taxonomy, the whole idea of immutable species. This was a direct assault on that. Secondly, he proposed that all living things share common ancestors.
Okay.
Meaning the incredible diversity of life we see today, from the tiniest bacterium to the biggest whale, emerged from a much smaller number of ancestral forms over vast stretches of time. A unifying idea, yes, but...
But it meant humans weren't special.
Exactly. It implied humans weren't specially created and set apart. We shared ancestry with other animals. That was a deeply unsettling thought for many people in Victorian England.
I could only imagine.
He also asserted that species change because of environmental factors, emphasizing that dynamic interplay between organisms and their surroundings. This was different from earlier evolutionary ideas, like Lamarck's, which suggested acquired traits could be inherited. Darwin argued for selection acting on pre-existing variations.
Okay, variation first, then selection.
Precisely. And critically, he presented natural selection as the main driving force of this evolution, offering a credible, naturalistic mechanism for how change could happen without needing supernatural intervention.
The mechanism was key.
Absolutely. And finally, maybe most compellingly for the scientific community, he marshaled this huge amount of evidence from seemingly disconnected fields.
Right, pulling it all together.
Yeah, pointing to fossil records for a timeline of life, geographical distribution of species showing patterns of diversification, comparative anatomy revealing homologous structures like the bones in a human arm, a bat wing, a whale flipper.
Shared underlying structures.
Right. And embryology showing similarities in developmental stages, all providing strong, compelling evidence for evolution. These weren't just theories, they were backed by a lifetime of observation and analysis, presented with such detailed, coherent argumentation. They immediately demanded attention and ignited widespread debate.
You can just imagine the stir this caused, the immediate reaction.
Slated.
Intense is putting it mildly, right?
Understatement of the century, maybe. It sparked immense debate within scientific circles, sure, but the ripples went way beyond academia. On one hand, it was met with intense interest, even support, from many progressive scientists and intellectuals who just saw the brilliance, the explanatory power of his theory.
Like Huxley.
Exactly. Thomas Henry Huxley, Darwin's bulldog, vigorously championed his ideas. Famously debated Bishop Samuel Wilberforce in 1860, defending Darwin's science against theological objections. They saw the elegance, the simplicity, its ability to unify all these disparate observations into one coherent framework.
Yeah, they got it.
But, on the other hand, it received severe criticism, particularly from religious circles, but also from some traditional scientists who held firmly to creationist views.
Understandably, perhaps.
Because Darwin's theory directly challenged that deeply ingrained understanding that humans and all species were specially created by God in their present form, as interpreted from the Bible. The design argument, popularized by William Paley, the idea that complexity implies a divine designer, like finding a watch on a heap.
Right, the watchmaker analogy.
That was directly undercut by natural selection, providing an alternative natural explanation for complexity. This wasn't just a scientific disagreement. It hit philosophical, theological, societal foundations. It challenged humanity's perceived unique status in the universe. It caused this huge emotional, societal upheaval, forcing people to reconsider their place in the cosmos, the very nature of creation, a truly revolutionary moment.
This raises an important question, though. How did such a controversial idea eventually become so widely accepted, at least within the scientific community?
Yeah, how did it win out?
Well, despite the initial controversy, the fierce debates, Darwin's work progressively gained acceptance mainly because its explanatory power was just unmatched. As more observations, more data accumulated from paleontology, finding more transitional fossils, from comparative anatomy, from biogeography, studying species distribution, they consistently fit within Darwin's framework.
The evidence kept mounting.
It did. It explained patterns that no other theory could adequately account for. So scientists, guided by the principles of empirical evidence, just began to see the overwhelming coherence, the predictive power of evolution by natural selection. It wasn't just a theory, it became the framework upon which all subsequent biological understanding would be built. It just worked. It explained the bewildering diversity and adaptation of life on Earth better than anything else. The scientific community, through rigorous testing, ongoing discovery, eventually recognized its profound truth.
It's easy to get fixated on the origin of species, isn't it? Because its impact was just so monumental.
It casts a long shadow.
It really does. But it's important to broaden our perspective a bit and understand that Darwin's contributions extended much further, often into areas that seem, maybe a bit far removed from the grand sweep of evolution initially.
Right. His work wasn't just about the theory itself.
No. It also solidified a particular scientific approach. His method emphasized the absolute importance of meticulous, long-term observation, rigorous experimentation, systematic data collection in the natural sciences.
The methodology was key.
It was a methodological contribution as much as a theoretical one, setting a higher standard for empirical research, really paving the way for modern biological inquiry.
Absolutely. And beyond origin, he explored other fascinating areas, showing the incredible breadth of his curiosity, his unwavering commitment to applying evolutionary principles to, well, every corner of natural phenomena he could find.
What else?
Okay, take his work, The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals, published in 1872. What's fascinating about this book is how meticulously he documented similarities in emotional expressions. Think anger, fear, surprise, joy, across different animal species and humans.
Interesting. Examples.
Well, for instance, he observed that a dog snarling to expose its teeth, or a human baring their teeth in rage. He argued these were expressions rooted in shared evolutionary history, serving as defensive or communicative signals. He even explored things like blushing, suggesting its social and evolutionary purpose.
Wow. Okay, so connecting human emotion to animal behavior.
Exactly. This work wasn't just some curious side project. It was groundbreaking because it effectively bridged that perceived gap between animal behavior and human psychology. It suggested a continuum, not a sharp divide.
Right.
It really laid the groundwork for modern ethology, the scientific study of animal behavior, and even aspects of comparative psychology, showing that human emotions are behaviors. They have deep evolutionary roots. They're subject to the same processes of natural selection as, say, the shape of a beak.
So more evidence for common ancestry, but on a behavioral level.
Precisely. Further challenging that idea of human uniqueness.
What else beyond emotions?
He also dedicated significant time to detailed plant studies throughout his life. Published several books on plants, which often get overlooked.
Like his work on orchids.
Exactly. He did extensive examinations of plant reproduction, their adaptation mechanisms. His observations on the pollination processes of orchids were crucial. He meticulously described how the unique, really intricate structures of different orchid species were perfectly adapted to attract specific pollinators, like a particular moth or a specific bird, ensuring their reproduction.
Wow.
This wasn't just about pretty flowers. It was a powerful, tangible demonstration of evolutionary adaptation at work in the plant kingdom, showcasing how natural selection fine-tunes even the most intricate biological systems for survival and reproduction.
So more examples of adaptation.
Yep. He also studied carnivorous plants like the Venus flytrap, climbing plants and their tendrils, the movements of plants in response to light. These lesser-known works just demonstrate the incredible breadth of his curiosity, the depth of his empirical approach, and his relentless pursuit of evolutionary explanations for all life forms.
Even earthworms, right? Wasn't that his last book?
It was. His final book, published shortly before his death, was The Formation of Vegetable Mold Through the Action of Worms, a testament to his lifelong fascination with the seemingly mundane, yet profoundly impactful forces of nature. Even earthworms had an evolutionary story to tell. #Shag6, Darwin's enduring legacy and continued relevance.
So what does this all mean for us today? Charles Darwin left this truly monumental legacy for science, for humanity, that extends way beyond academia.
Absolutely.
His core legacy, really, is the scientific establishment of the fact that living things diversify and change through evolutionary processes. That understanding is just foundational to almost everything we know about life on Earth. It's the bedrock of modern biology.
The profound and widespread impact of that understanding. Yeah, it cannot be overstated. Firstly, it fundamentally transformed the nature of biological research itself. It shifted biology from just descriptive cataloging, what is this organism, to an explanatory framework rooted in historical processes.
Asking, how did it get this way?
Exactly. How did this organism evolve? This, in turn, accelerated the development of entire fields. Genetics, molecular biology, paleontology, they all found a coherent, unifying structure within the evolutionary framework. Think about it. The discovery of DNA and genetic mechanisms in the 20th century. It provided the molecular blueprint for the variation and inheritance that Darwin's theory of natural selection required.
Right. Genetics filled a gap Darwin couldn't.
Precisely. Furthermore, Darwin's work dramatically shook that anthropocentric view of the universe, the idea that humans are at the absolute center of creation, totally distinct from and superior to all other life.
Yeah, knocked us off the pedestal a bit.
You could say that. Instead, he placed humans squarely within nature, in a more realistic scientific context. It's just another product of the same evolutionary processes that shaped everything else. This wasn't about diminishing humanity, though. It was about understanding our interconnectedness, our shared heritage with the vast tapestry of life. His theories also pioneered the birth of entirely new scientific disciplines, like ecology, the study of relationships between organisms and their environment, and conservation biology, which applies evolutionary principles to protect biodiversity and understand the fragility of ecosystems. These fields wouldn't exist in the same way without Darwin.
But the impact isn't just theoretical, right? It has very real practical applications. Stuff that touches our everyday lives.
Oh, absolutely. In profound ways.
Yeah.
For example, Darwin's concept of natural selection has been instrumental in modern medicine.
How so?
It helps us understand the evolutionary origins of diseases, how pathogens like viruses and bacteria evolve and adapt, and, critically, how to address pressing public health issues like antibiotic resistance.
Ah, right. Bacteria evolving to resist drugs.
Exactly. Bacteria, through rapid natural selection, evolve resistance to the drugs we use, making our treatments less effective over time. Understanding this evolutionary dynamic is absolutely key to developing new treatments, new public health strategies like responsible antibiotic use, or developing new vaccines that anticipate viral evolution.
So direct medical application.
Definitely. And in agriculture, too. His theories have been applied for developing better crop varieties, improving animal breeding practices.
Selective breeding.
Yeah, farmers and scientists use principles of selective breeding, which is essentially an accelerated form of artificial selection, something Darwin studied closely to cultivate plants with higher yields, better disease resistance, improved nutritional value, and to breed animals with desirable traits for meat, milk, wool, whatever. Even the development of GMOs, genetically modified organisms, relies fundamentally on understanding genetic variation and the potential for rapid evolutionary change.
Okay, so medicine, food.
Right, so from the medicine you take to the food you eat, and even how we understand our own minds and behaviors through evolutionary psychology, Darwin's insights are deeply ingrained in modern practices and our collective understanding of life. It's everywhere once you start looking.
Now, it's important we acknowledge that despite its eventual widespread acceptance, its immense explanatory power. The theory of evolution faced huge criticisms right from the start, and continued to for decades. It wasn't an easy road for Darwin's ideas at all.
Definitely not smooth sailing.
Early opposition was really strong, especially from many individuals, institutions with religious beliefs. They argued fervently for the fixed, unchanging nature of species, as they believed it was laid out in religious texts. That idea of special creation was just so deeply entrenched,
Yeah.
and Darwin's theory seemed to directly contradict it, leading to widespread moral theological outrage.
Understandable in that context.
But the criticism wasn't only religious, was it?
Yeah.
Darwin also got criticized by some within the scientific community itself.
That's right. Some scientists felt he introduced his theory without what they saw as sufficient scientific evidence to fully explain, say, the complex structures of living things or the actual emergence of new species.
Like the gaps in the theory.
Exactly. Yeah. For example, the precise mechanism of inheritance. That was a huge unknown in Darwin's time. The prevailing idea back then was something called blending inheritance.
Blending. What's that?
The idea that offspring would just be an average, a blend of their parents' traits, like mixing paint.
Okay.
But if that were true, any beneficial new variation would quickly be blended away, diluted over generations, which would make natural selection pretty ineffective, right? How could it build up complex adaptations if variation just disappears?
Ah, I see the problem. That's a major hole.
It was a critical gap in his otherwise comprehensive theory. People struggled to grasp how variations were passed down reliably, or how entirely new traits could arise from seemingly small, incremental changes without a clear understanding of genetics.
And the fossil record, too.
Yeah, the fossil record was still pretty sparse in his day compared to now. This led some to question the gradual nature of evolution, because many of the intermediate forms, the missing links, hadn't been discovered yet.
So valid scientific questions at the time.
Absolutely. It's a crucial point, and it leads directly into how these criticisms were ultimately addressed and how the theory got strengthened, solidified over time. The scientific community didn't just dismiss the criticisms. They actively worked to fill those gaps, seek more evidence.
Right. Science progresses.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is that with the rapid development of genetic science, molecular biology in the 20th century, Darwin's views weren't just increasingly supported, they were profoundly expanded upon. Genetics, in particular, provided that missing piece of the puzzle Darwin himself didn't have, the mechanism of inheritance.
Mendel's peas.
Mendel's peas. The rediscovery of Gregor Mendel's work on heredity in the early 1900s was revolutionary. He showed that traits are passed down in discrete units, what we now call genes, not blended.
Ah, so discrete units not blending.
Right. This directly countered the blending inheritance problem. It showed how variation could be preserved across generations, maintained for natural selection to act upon. Then discovering the structure of DNA in the mid-20th century provided the concrete molecular basis for the variation and inheritance that Darwin's theory relied on.
So genetics provided the mechanism.
It did.
Yeah.
And this confluence of ideas, combining Darwinian natural selection with Mendelian genetics, population genetics, paleontology, systematics, led to what we call the modern synthesis of evolutionary biology, mostly developed in the 1930s and 40s.
Modern synthesis. Okay.
This grand synthesis profoundly strengthened, solidified the theory. It provided both the selective force, natural selection, and the underlying mechanism for variation and inheritance, genetics, making the theory of evolution the robust, universally accepted framework it is today within science. And of course, fossil discoveries continue to pile up, filling in many of those gaps critics had pointed to, further validating the gradual nature of evolutionary change.
It's easy to see Darwin as just this scientific giant, almost a mythic figure, a name in a textbook. But it's valuable, I think, to take a brief, humanizing look at his personal life, too.
Yeah, the man behind the theory.
He was, by all accounts, a deeply devoted family man, a remarkably private individual, actually. He was happily married to his first cousin, Emma Wedgwood, in 1839, and together they had 10 children, though sadly not all survived childhood.
A big family.
A very big family. And this image of a busy family man balancing this profound scientific inquiry with the joys and the sorrows of domestic life, it just adds another rich layer to his persona. Emma herself was devoutly religious, a Unitarian, and she often worried about the theological implications of his work.
That must have caused some tension.
It did, reportedly, but their marriage remained strong, characterized by mutual respect, deep affection.
And his health struggles, too.
Right. What's also important to remember is that despite the immense intellectual work he undertook, he battled lifelong, often really debilitating illnesses. He constantly struggled with various ailments, chronic stomach problems, extreme fatigue, heart palpitations, dizzy spells, often confined him to his home for long periods.
Yeah, the cause is still debated, isn't it? Chagas disease from the beagle, maybe? Or stress?
Exactly. The exact nature of his illness is still debated. Some suggest Chagas disease contracted from an insect bite on the Beagle voyage. Others point more to psychosomatic illness, maybe brought on by the immense stress and controversy surrounding his work. We don't know for sure.
But he kept working.
Remarkably, yes. Even with these profound personal health challenges, he never stopped his scientific work. His dedication was just unwavering. He adapted his life to his illness, often working from his study at Down House, maintaining this rigorous schedule of research, writing, correspondence, fueled by this insatiable curiosity about the natural world. It really speaks volumes about his profound commitment, despite constant physical discomfort.
Indeed. And he spent his final years at Down House in Kent, England, which became his sanctuary, really, his laboratory, the quiet crucible of his continued thought.
Still working away.
Absolutely. From there, he continued his scientific work, publishing prolifically on topics ranging from those earthworms we mentioned to orchid pollination to the descent of man, which specifically tackled human evolution and sexual selection.
Didn't shy away from the human question later on.
Not at all. He maintained a keen scientific curiosity, actively engaged with the broader scientific world, responded to critiques, refined his ideas. His intellectual output continued right up until near the end of his life, just demonstrating that unwavering dedication.
And his death.
His passing on April 19, 1882, marked the end of an era, but his legacy was already firmly established by then, and the ultimate testament, perhaps, to his profound impact, the growing acceptance of his ideas, was his burial.
In Westminster Abbey, right?
In Westminster Abbey. Among other significant scientists like Newton and national figures, this was a rare, immense honor. Initially suggested by figures like John Lubbock, supported by a petition signed by many leading parliamentarians, scientists, it really signified his monumental contribution to human knowledge and the profound shift he had initiated in scientific thought. Hashtag outro.
Okay, let's unpack this one last time. Let's try and pull all these threads together. Charles Darwin, he was so much more than just a scientist, wasn't he?
Much more.
He was a profound thinker, a meticulous observer, and frankly, a courageous intellectual, someone who fundamentally altered humanity's understanding of nature and, by extension, ourselves. His life, from that almost accidental path into natural history, the geology, to his transformative voyage on the Beagle, to those painstaking decades of solitary research, it just exemplifies the unparalleled power of observation, persistent inquiry, and having the courage to challenge deeply held beliefs in pursuit of scientific truth.
Well said. His theory of evolution, and specifically that mechanism of natural selection, It didn't just usher in a new era in natural sciences. It entirely changed our perspective on the history of life on Earth.
Right.
It moved us beyond those static, unchanging views of creation to this dynamic, ever-changing understanding of biodiversity, a grand, interconnected story unfolding over vast geological timescales.
And his method, too.
Yeah, what's equally important is his scientific method itself. That inquisitive, evidence-based approach rooted in meticulous observation, rigorous analysis. It remains the undisputed foundation of scientific research today, guiding virtually every field of inquiry.
Hmm.
Thanks to his work, those complex relationships between species and their environment are far better understood. It allows us to grasp the intricate web of life and our own place within it, and perhaps most significantly for us, humanity's position in nature has been scientifically established, showing our deep evolutionary connection to all other living things, rooting us firmly in the grand narrative of biological history.
Right.
His legacy is truly indispensable for modern biology, natural sciences, medicine, agriculture, indeed our entire understanding of the living world. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Darwin didn't just give us a theory. He gave us this revolutionary lens through which to understand the incredible unfolding story of life itself. A story that continues to reveal new chapters even today.
So a final thought for you listening. As you go about your day, maybe look at the incredible diversity of life around you. I mean, from the smallest insect crawling on the pavement to the tallest tree reaching for the sky, or even the subtle nuances you see in human behavior. And just consider, how does Darwin's profound understanding of adaptation and natural selection make you see the world and maybe your own place within it just a little bit differently? And what new questions does that perspective perhaps raise for you?